Chapter 311. Jack's eyes on Alara were the sort of thing that made you wonder if punching a Duke's son could be reclassified as community service. I didn't like it. Disgusting, I thought. But I didn't move. Not yet. I just watched him, because the thing about someone who hides behind smiles is that they always forget. Their eyes still tell the truth. And right now, Jack's eyes were brimming with that old familiar arrogance. The kind that usually ends up being outlived by a brick wall or karma on a deadline. It wasn't just confidence. It was the absolute certainty of someone who thought the world had been gift-wrapped specifically for them, complete with a bow made of everyone else's compliance. Well, Jack said, cocking his head like someone performing the idea of civility. Since we don't share any events, I suppose we'll only find out at the finale, won't we? We will. I nodded, my tone so even it could have been used to level shelves. And you, Arthur Nightingale, you're the one to beat, Jack continued, his smile widening just enough to show a hint of teeth. A predator's smile, one that never quite reached his eyes. Rank one of the most prestigious academy in the world. Ready to give up the crown. I chuckled, slowly, because if you're going to laugh at someone, do it like you're already picturing their defeat. Like you've seen the ending and found it mildly amusing. Try me. That was when a voice cut through the tension like a well-aimed ice cube down the back of your shirt. You two seem to be forgetting about me. Lucifer walked over, hands in his pockets, face relaxed but eyes sharp, like a man who could smile while calculating trajectories for 10 different kinds of victory. His windward lineage was evident in the perfect posture that seemed to require absolutely no effort, the kind that made tailors weep with gratitude. I want the crown too, he said with that perfectly measured windward calm. And I don't plan on losing. Jack's eyes narrowed as all three of us stood there. A triangle of tension and ambition and an unhealthy amount of testosterone. If someone had taken a photo of us just then, they could have sold it to textbooks as a definition of rivals with unresolved issues. Or perhaps as a visual aid for male ego density reaching critical mass. Well, Jack sighed, as though we just inconvenienced him by breathing the same air. This got annoying, and with a flick of his coat and one last sideways glance at Alara, because of course he had to do that, he turned and strolled away like a man who thought retreat was a tactical choice. Each step was carefully measured, a performance of dismissal meant for an audience he assumed was always watching. Lucifer looked at me. Different events, he said, holding out his hand. But I want you at the finale. I met his gaze and saw it. That spark in his verdant eyes. Not pride. Not mockery. Respect. He wanted a fair fight. A real one. Me at my best. For once I wanted the same. I wasn't here to outmaneuver them, to trick them into a win. Not this time. I wanted to beat them with nothing but strength. I'll be there, I said, gripping his hand. Try and keep up. Lucifer nodded once and walked off, coat swaying behind him like he had rehearsed the movement in front of a mirror. Twice. His presence lingered even after he left, like expensive cologne or the memory of a perfect musical note. Wow, Alara said, her voice light but not without a touch of amusement. To think you'd have such fearsome rivals. Lucifer Windward and Jack Blazespout. The slight pause before Jack's name spoke volumes. A library of disdain compressed into a quarter second of hesitation. Are you close with him? I asked. She scratched her cheek like she was trying to erase the memory. A delicate gesture that somehow conveyed years of accumulated irritation. Not really. We used to see each other a lot when we were younger. He's a duke's son. I'm an archduke's daughter. You know how those things go. Endless balls, garden parties, and formal dinners where children are expected to behave like miniature adults, while the real adults behave like overgrown children. Her lips quirked into a rueful smile. But we never really clicked. He was always focused on something other than actually having a conversation. Always looking over your shoulder for someone more important to talk to. And, well, he doesn't really have friends. Not real ones, anyway. I pointed, somewhat obviously, toward the small crowd orbiting Jack like moons around a particularly smug planet. A solar system where every celestial body existed solely to reflect his light. Doesn't look like someone who lacks friends. Alara tilted her head, smiling faintly. Those aren't friends. Those are admirers. Collectors of proximity. Jack doesn't collect people, he acquires them. Like trophies or rare coins. And most don't notice until it's far too late. She studied the group with the clinical detachment of a biologist observing an unusual species. By then, they're either dependent on his approval or too invested to walk away. She didn't say it with spite. More like someone commenting on the weather. A bit grim, mildly unpredictable, but not unexpected. I glanced toward the cluster again, my eyes catching on a tall figure standing just behind Jack. Tobias, son of a marquis. A white ranker with a talent that could hold its own against anyone in Class 2A. Not flashy, but dependable. The kind of person who could tear down a wall while others argued about the door. And there he is, I thought. A gifted genius playing second fiddle to a monster with a smile. Alara was also white rank, but unlike Tobias, she was a pure support mage. Her buffs and barriers were strong enough to compare with Rachel's. Perhaps even surpass them in certain circumstances. Her shields could withstand artillery strikes, and her enhancement spells could make even a novice fighter move like a master. Her attack spells, however, wouldn't exactly be breaking headlines. Not unless someone counted mildly inconvenient light show as an attack. Anyway, Alara said, brushing some hair behind her ear. It's been nice talking to you. You're more easygoing than Jack. Though that's not really saying much. Thanks, I smiled, and I meant it. Being around Alara was like slipping into a warm bath. Comforting, steady, and unlikely to try and stab you during dinner. She reminded me of Rachel back when things were simpler, before the affection turned into obsession, and the obsession started threatening to write me into a romantic psychological thriller with a questionable third act. Then, just as I was about to say something further, I felt a soft weight on my back. A very familiar one. Ratch? I asked, glancing over my shoulder. Rachel was latched onto me like a saintess-shaped backpack, her arms tight around my torso, and her golden hair spilling over my shoulder like a waterfall of spun sunshine. Her grip had the determined strength of someone who had spent considerable time thinking about optimal clinging techniques. No more, she mumbled, her voice muffled into my spine. Like I was a particularly chatty pillow. Alara blinked, caught somewhere between confusion and polite concern. The expression of someone watching an unexpected plot twist in what they thought was a straightforward conversation. And then, from my left, because fate enjoys comedic timing and has a particular fondness for the rule of three, I felt the faintest tickle of honey-scented perfume and a voice like cool silk whisper against my ear. I believe what she means, Serafina said. Is stop seducing. I turned, only to find her trying to pry Rachel off me with the sort of refined effort that somehow still looked like a diplomatic performance. No raised voices. No hair-pulling. Just the gentle insistence of a quiet war waged with poise. Centuries of royal breeding had apparently perfected the art of conflict resolution that looked, to outside observers, like a cordial ballet. I don't know how princesses do this, I thought. Even when they were fighting over you, they managed to make it look like a royal waltz. A choreographed disagreement where every movement was precise, every word calibrated, and the daggers remained firmly metaphorical and ornately decorated. I stood there, caught between one girl hugging me like a life-size teddy bear, another attempting a noble intervention with the grace of someone disarming a bomb while wearing formal evening wear, and Alara watching the whole scene like someone who'd just accidentally tuned into a reality show on Fast Forward. The festival grounds stretched around us, buzzing with students from academies across the continent. Banners fluttered, enchanted lanterns hovered, and approximately 76 different varieties of street food perfumed the air with competing aromas. Somewhere, a brass band was enthusiastically murdering what might have once been classical music before it met their particular interpretation. And here we were, creating our own little drama in the middle of it all. Welcome to the Inter-Academy Festival. Apparently, my fanbase had a dress code, and a remarkably poor sense of timing. Chapter 312. Rachel and Serafina were still delicately arguing, if one could call a cold war with flowery words and passive-aggressive smiles an argument. Meanwhile, Elara stood quietly beside me, her violet eyes flicking between the Saintess and the Princess of Mount Hua like someone watching two cats hiss at each other on a velvet cushion. Then her gaze met mine, and her mouth formed a soft little O, the international symbol for I see what kind of mess this is. She raised her hand to cover her lips in a gesture halfway between amusement and polite alarm. Well, she said gently. It seems you're busy, Arthur. I'll go now. She drifted past me like a particularly well-mannered breeze. Finally, Rachel muttered, the words not even pretending to be charitable. I wondered how long she'd cling to you. She wasn't clinging, Ratch? I said as diplomatically as possible while staring at the Saintess, who was now pouting like she'd just been told Christmas was cancelled. Too much, Seraphina murmured, folding her arms in judgment. Both girls turned to me, their stares boring into my soul like I was a particularly confusing tax form. And then, like a rom-com missile with lipstick guidance, Cecilia arrived. Arthur, she cooed, weaving her arms around my right arm like it was her personal property, and also possibly her emotional support limb. I missed you. Behave yourself, Rachel snapped, eyes narrowing. Ha! Cecilia's tone sharpened like a stiletto's heel. Why am I hearing that from you, oh horny Saintess? Rachel and Cecilia locked eyes, the air between them practically crackling with passive-aggressive divinity. Then Seraphina, subtle as a snowfall, slid her hand into the mix. She took my other arm and gently tugged, pulling me slightly toward her with a grace so serene it was suspicious. Arthur? She leaned in, her breath brushing my ear like she was auditioning for the role of temptation incarnate. Her voice was soft, warm and dangerously sweet, like sugar laced with moonlight. We have tactical simulation together, she murmured, her fingers lacing with mine. Delicate, elegant, impossibly sure. We do, I nodded, mostly because my brain had short-circuited somewhere between Arthur and ear whispering. Her lips curled up, not a smirk nor a grin, but something far more lethal, a quiet, self-assured smile. I want you all to myself. My lungs decided now was a good time to forget how to function. Her scent, cool, like snow and silver tea, wrapped around me as I tried to remember what oxygen was for. Then, from beyond the swarm of beauty and spiritual intimidation, a hand reached out with something small and blessedly normal. Arthur, have this, Rose said. Cup. Liquid. Sanity. I took it gratefully and drank. What is it? Rachel asked, blinking as her attention finally slid off Cecilia's face like a cat realizing the laser pointer had vanished. Apple cider, I replied. Thanks, Rose. She just smiled. At least one of them was content with saving my life instead of claiming it. Across the hall, my eyes snagged on something, someone, sharper than most things ought to be, like a nail sticking out of a polished floorboard, except this nail could cut through solid myth. A group of students stood at ease, wrapped in the prestigious colors of Starcrest Academy. They had that casual elegance only people raised on cultivation manuals and family legacies could possess. But even in that lot, three figures stood apart, like punctuation marks in an otherwise average sentence. The first was Arya Gu, firechild of the Gu family, whose flames were apparently passed down like family heirlooms and stomach ulcers. Her aura flickered around her, warm and impatient, the kind of person who probably thought, let's burn it down, was a reasonable opening argument in a debate. Next to her was Ava Peng, fists clenched loosely, as though even gravity wasn't entirely sure it wanted to challenge her. The Peng family were second only to the Kagu family in unarmed combat, and Ava looked like she could shatter a wall or a philosophical argument with equal ease. And then there was Siola Moyong. She didn't stand out. She pressed in. Her presence wasn't loud or showy. It was heavy, like standing too close to the edge of a mountain cliff and realizing the wind's gone quiet. Her hair spilled like ink down her back, smooth and deliberate. Her golden eyes shimmered, not like stars, but like coins dropped into a wishing well, deep, bright, and far too ancient for comfort. The Moyong family's sword arts were legendary, and Siola was their prodigy. No, prodigy implied she might one day be great. She already was. The world had her marked as future number 2 after Jack was revealed to be the third calamity. A statement so ludicrously specific it carried the weight of prophecy. Because number 1, that was Lucifer Windward. Of course. Readers of Saga of the Divine Swordsman had dubbed her the female Lucifer for a reason. She was cold steel in a room full of glowing embers. Fair, unfair, it didn't matter. She was going to carve her way through the ranks with a smile on her face and a sword in her hand. And I might have been staring. "You're looking at another girl." Cecilia's voice chimed sweetly beside me, like a songbird holding a kitchen knife. I blinked. Rachel was on my other side, smiling. Smiling. Except her eyes weren't smiling. They were studying me the way an assassin studies the fastest route to the spine. "I was just observing talent," I said quickly, adjusting my collar like it might shield me from divine retribution. Rachel's smile deepened in the way that implied several spiritual wars had been declared simultaneously. Yes, I may have, once again, professionally and catastrophically messed up. The air in the headmaster's office was unusually still, which was remarkable given that the room had just tried to rip itself into a dozen glittering dimensions under Eva's will. Now all of that was gone, like a storm that had politely cleaned up after itself. "I'm surprised to see you ask for an invitation so shamelessly," Eva said, her voice smooth as ice and twice as cold. Her navy blue hair was pinned in an immaculate coil, every strand declaring war against disorder. Her violet eyes, however, were anything but composed. They gleamed like stars about to go supernova. Across from her, hands in his pockets, stood Magnus Dracar, the martial king himself, looking like he'd just wandered in from a stroll and hadn't noticed the magical apocalypse that had tried to occur around him. "How long has it been again?" Eva asked, tone arid enough to parch a desert. 11 years, I believe," Magnus replied with a smile that could outshine a smug sun. "You were the first one who lost to me, after all." "I was," Eva said, her voice flatter than a politician's promise. Then her eyes narrowed, and the temperature of the room plummeted. "But really, what brings the martial king to my office? Seeking nostalgia? Or just checking if your legacy still matters?" There was a sound, no, a sensation, like reality holding its breath. Then space fractured, quietly. Light spilled out of nowhere and everywhere at once. Lances of pure light, thousands of them, hovered mid-air, poised like they were waiting for someone to flinch. They didn't buzz or hum. That would have been too dramatic. They simply existed, impossibly precise, as if the universe had decided that this man needed to be politely annihilated. Magnus didn't blink, didn't budge. He just stood there, arms still lazily at his sides, as though surrounded by death was his usual Thursday afternoon. "You always were a bit theatrical," he said mildly. "Still, as expected from the world's strongest light mage. You are formidable." Eva didn't answer. Her eyes were still calculating angles. "But," Magnus added with a tilt of his head, "you haven't improved." The words were casual, almost kind, like telling someone their shoelace was untied, except in this case the shoelace was her entire career. Eva's brow twitched. "You think that just because I couldn't beat you back then," she said slowly, "and you've gotten stronger while I haven't," Magnus interrupted gently. "Not really. Not in the way that matters." Eva exhaled sharply, and with it, the light dissolved. The pure light lances vanished, as though they had simply changed their minds about existence. "I just needed to vent," she muttered. "I do recommend yoga," Magnus offered. "Or a punching bag. Maybe a moon to kick." Eva rolled her eyes. Magnus took a few leisurely steps forward, his expression softening. "But no, I'm not here to flex. I'm here to observe." "Observe what?" The future, he said. I've watched enough battles on screens, read enough reports written by the dull. This time I want to see them with my own eyes. The talent. The ones who'll stand at the summit when we're gone. Eva gave him a long look, as if weighing whether he meant it or just liked the sound of his own voice. Then, finally, she sat back in her chair and waved one hand dismissively. Fine. Stay. Just don't break anyone. No promises, Magnus smiled. But I'll try to be civil. That would be new, Eva muttered, already regretting everything. Chapter 313, Mana Fortress Defense. The first event in the Inter-Academy Festival was the Mana Fortress Defense. This event required the 60 participating students to deal with coordinated attacks from beasts captured by the Academy for the event. The setting was spectacular. A massive arena transformed into a battlefield with 10 separate fortresses, each allocated to a team of 6 students from mixed academies. The fortresses weren't mere physical structures but advanced constructs that responded to their defenders' actions, growing stronger or weaker based on how well the team functioned together. The design of each fortress reflected cutting-edge technological achievements, holographic reinforcement matrices overlaid on physical architecture, automated defense systems with advanced targeting algorithms, and central power cores that synchronized with the defenders' abilities. The arena itself was equipped with environmental monitoring systems and damage control protocols that could assess performance in real time. The rules were simple yet demanding. Defend your fortress against waves of increasingly powerful mana beasts, while maintaining your team's cohesion. Points were awarded for successful defense, tactical ingenuity, and efficient beast suppression. Each fortress contained a central power core that, if properly synchronized with, would enhance the team's abilities, but only if all 6 members contributed harmoniously. Spectators filled the stands surrounding the arena, their excited chatter creating a constant background hum. Academy officials and talent scouts from military organizations occupied premium viewing boxes, their attentive gazes missing nothing. This wasn't just a competition, it was a recruitment ground for the next generation of elite fighters. Vice Headmaster Valerie took the center stage, her dark hair gleaming under the morning sun. She raised a hand, and the crowd gradually fell silent. Competitors, her voice resonated across the field. Your first challenge begins now. With a gesture of her hand, the ground trembled. Energy barriers sprung up around each fortress as massive gates opened in the arena walls. The beasts had arrived. Fortress 3 stood as a gleaming citadel of blue-white stone, its architecture reminiscent of northern design with sweeping spires and reinforced battlements. Upon its highest tower stood Lucifer Windward, his blonde hair catching the morning light as he surveyed the approaching threats. The Prince of the North cut an impressive figure against the skyline. Tall, composed, his white academy uniform immaculate despite the wind that whipped around the tower's peak. His eyes narrowed as he focused on the emerging beasts. The god's eyes gift activated subtly, his vision sharpening until he could discern individual hairs on creatures still hundreds of yards away. He raised 2 fingers and swept them right to left, signaling to his teammates below. On the eastern battlement, Gene Ashbluff acknowledged the signal with a slight tilt of his head. The dark-haired necromancer stood with unnatural stillness, his pale skin contrasting sharply with his black uniform. Twin short swords remained sheathed at his hips as his hands moved through subtle gestures, preparing for the coming conflict. They're testing our formation, Gene remarked quietly to himself, analyzing the beast's movement patterns. Predictable. He turned slightly, catching the eye of their other primary combatant. A slight nod conveyed his thoughts, save strength for later waves. On the western wall, Ava Peng received his message with a short nod of acknowledgement. The white-rank martial artist rolled her shoulders, loosening muscles that were already primed for combat. Right flank's mine, she called out, voice crisp and confident. Let them come. The remaining 3 team members, a water spear user from Serpentstone, a wind specialist from Starcrest, and a support mage from Slatemark, positioned themselves according to Lucifer's hand signals. They understood the hierarchy instantly. The 3 white rank and integration rank fighters would lead, while they would provide specialized support. The first wave emerged fully from the gates now, Dozens of 4-star crystal wolves whose fur refracted light like living prisms. Their eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence as they assessed the fortress, splitting into coordinated hunting packs. Above them, 3 winged serpents with scales that shifted color to match the sky circled in precise patterns. The fortress's automatic defenses activated with a low hum. Advanced targeting systems locked onto approaching threats before releasing concentrated bolts of energy. The first volley struck with impressive precision, felling 3 wolves and forcing a serpent to execute a sharp, evasive maneuver. But the beasts adapted quickly, their movements becoming more erratic, deliberately avoiding the predictable targeting patterns. Jean watched as the wolf pack split into 3 coordinated groups. "They're learning fast," he observed to the barrier specialist beside him. "Adapting to our defensive patterns already." From the tower, Lucifer made a cutting motion with his hand. The prince's expression remained calm as he assessed the situation. The wolves were approaching from 3 directions, clearly intending to split their defensive focus, while the aerial units prepared for opportunistic strikes. The time for observation had ended. Lucifer extended his hand, and white mana coalesced around his fingers before flowing outward to form his sword. Not drawn from a scabbard but manifested directly from his power. The blade gleamed with an inner light as he activated his first gift, yin-yang body. 6 elemental energies began circulating around him. Ribbons of fire, ice, water, lightning, wind, and earth, each responding to his will. The first movement of the myth of the northern peak art flowed through him as he executed a precise horizontal cut. A crescent wave of freezing energy shot toward the largest wolf pack, the temperature around the blade dropping so rapidly that frost patterns spread across its surface. The ground beneath the charging beasts frosted instantly. The front line of wolves found their crystalline legs frozen to the ground mid-stride, momentum carrying their bodies forward while their limbs remained trapped. Those behind crashed into their immobilized packmates, creating a chaotic tangle of thrashing bodies and lethal crystal fur. Jean, seeing the opening Lucifer had created, drew his twin short swords. The blades served as conduits for his dark mana, leaving trails of deep violet light in the air. The ground before the eastern wall split open, and skeletal hands emerged, clawing upward as animated bones pulled themselves from the depths. "Engage and contain," Jean directed, his voice low but clear. The skeletal warriors charged toward the second wolf pack, bone weapons glinting with the same violet energy that had created them. "These constructs should hold them," he noted to Lucifer through their communication link. "For now." Meanwhile, Ava had taken a different approach to the third group of wolves. She vaulted from the western wall in a perfect arc that would place her directly in their path. When she struck the ground, the impact resonated through the arena floor. A shockwave spread outward, the stone cracking in a perfect circle around her landing point. "Come on then," she challenged, settling into a low, grounded stance. Her muscles tensed as power circulated through specialized pathways, reinforcing her body beyond normal human limits. Her fists began to glow with a deep crimson light. The lead wolf recovered first, lunging at her with crystalline fangs extended. Ava pivoted, her movement precise and fluid. Her fist connected with the beast's skull, the impact producing a sound like a massive bell being struck. Cracks spread across the wolf's head before it collapsed entirely, its body crumpling from the concentrated force. "One down," she muttered, already moving to the next target. Her movements flowed smoothly from one strike to the next, generating rippling aftershocks that damaged multiple opponents simultaneously. Each impact produced that same resonant tone, a deadly rhythm beating through her controlled assault. Above the battlefield, the winged serpents had been circling, waiting for an opening. Seeing the defenders engaged with the ground forces, they tucked their wings and dove toward the fortress's central tower, bodies shifting color to blend with the sky. Lucifer tracked their movement with his god's eyes. "Predictable," he murmured, reading their attack pattern seconds before execution. The wind around him responded to his will, gathering around his blade and compressing until the air itself became a weapon. With 3 precise cuts, each movement economical and refined, He released concentrated air blades that intercepted the serpent's mid-dive. 2 serpents were caught directly, their wings sheared by the concentrated air pressure. Their bodies tumbled from the sky, control lost as they spiraled toward the ground. The 3rd serpent displayed remarkable awareness, twisting its sinuous body at the last possible moment to avoid direct impact. The serpent-stone water elementalist, positioned on the north wall, had been tracking the aerial threat. With a flowing gesture, she drew moisture from the air and compressed it into densely packed water spears that converged on the serpent from multiple angles. "Got you," she said with satisfaction as 3 struck true, piercing its color-shifting scales. Wounded, it retreated toward the arena wall, its attack run abandoned. On the eastern front, Jin's undead forces had engaged the second wolf pack. The skeletal warriors lacked the raw strength to match the crystal wolves, but they possessed other advantages. When claws or fangs shattered bone, the fragments simply reformed, pulled back together by the dark mana that animated them. "They can't win a war of attrition," Jin observed coolly as the wolves found themselves increasingly frustrated. Each time they destroyed a skeletal warrior, it reconstructed itself while their own injuries accumulated. He traced complex patterns with his twin short swords, dark mana coalescing around the broken bone fragments from his destroyed warriors. The cloud condensed into hundreds of needle-like projectiles that rained down on the wolf pack. Where they struck, dark energy spread outward, withering the crystalline fur that had served as the beast's primary defense. "Your constructs work well together," the support mage commented, impressed by Jin's control. "They're extensions of will, nothing more," Jin replied, his focus unbroken as he directed the assault. Across the battlefield, Ava had transformed into a blur of perpetual motion. Each strike carried the full weight of her body enhanced by perfectly controlled power circulation. Where her fists or feet connected with the ground, crater-like impressions formed, the stone itself yielding to her concentrated force. "You're too slow," she taunted as a wolf lunged for her throat, only to strike empty air as she pivoted away. "And now you're too dead," she added, driving her fist through its crystal-armored skull. Despite facing 12 opponents simultaneously, she maintained perfect positional awareness, never remaining in one place long enough to be surrounded. Her breathing remained measured, her movements economical despite their devastating effect. The first wave lasted 8 minutes before the final beast fell, one of Jin's bone spears piercing the retreating winged serpent as it attempted to return to the arena gates. As the dust settled, their fortress remained untouched. Chapter 3:14. Lucifer descended from the tower to confer briefly with Jin and Ava. "Thoughts?" he asked simply. "They adapted faster than expected to our automated defenses," Jin noted, already adjusting his energy circulation to recover. "I'll modify my approach for the next wave." Ava rolled her shoulders, working out minimal tension. "Nothing I couldn't handle, but these 4-stars were smarter than usual. The next wave will be interesting. Conserve strength for the final wave," Lucifer advised. "It will test us far more severely." Their conversation was brief and focused on tactical refinement. As they resumed their positions, they noted the state of the other fortresses. 2 had sustained minor damage to their outer walls, while a 3rd was actively repairing a breach. As if responding to the completion of the first wave, the arena gates opened once more. The second wave emerged, 5-star beasts with elemental enhancements, their bodies wreathed in flames, lightning, or toxic miasma. These weren't merely stronger versions of the first wave but entirely different tactical challenges, wielding elemental forces as primary weapons. "Formation Delta," Lucifer called, and the team reconfigured without hesitation. Jin took the offensive lead position this time, his dark mana particularly effective against the elemental constructs. Dark energy spread from Jin's position, creating concentric circles around the fortress perimeter. Where elemental beasts stepped upon this corrupted ground, their power visibly diminished. Flames burned lower, lightning crackled with reduced intensity, miasma thinned and dispersed. "Their connection to elemental energy is weakening," Jin explained to the barrier specialist. "Dark mana disrupts the attachment points." Meanwhile, Ava had shifted to a supporting role, positioning herself at the fortress gate. A flame-wreathed tiger charged through a gap in Jin's field, moving with supernatural speed toward the entrance. "I've got this one," Ava called, stepping forward to intercept. Her movements became fluid, almost water-like, as she redirected the tiger's momentum while simultaneously striking precise points along its body. Each impact targeted a key junction point, 17 strikes delivered in the span of 2 seconds. The flames wreathing the tiger guttered and died as its energy pathways collapsed. Without its fiery protection, the beast was just flesh and bone, still formidable but vulnerable. Ava's final strike targeted the base of its skull, and the massive body crumpled mid-leap. "One less problem," she remarked, already scanning for the next threat. From his position on the tower, Lucifer continued to coordinate the team's overall defense. When a cluster of lightning-enhanced bears broke through Jin's dark field and overwhelmed several skeletal warriors, he identified the critical moment to intervene. "Jin, clear your constructs," he called down, ice energy condensing around his blade until frost crystals formed in the air with each breath. "Clearing," Jin confirmed, dissolving his skeletal warriors in the bear's path. Lucifer's strike was singular but devastating, an overhead cut that released a column of absolute cold toward the charging bears. When this freezing energy collided with the bears' electrical shields, a spectacular reaction occurred. The opposing elemental forces created a crystallization effect, transmuting the beasts into frozen statues. "Now," Lucifer called to the water elementalist, who saw the opportunity he'd created. "On it," she replied, extracting water molecules from the frozen bears to create pressurized jets that targeted approaching fire-wreathed beasts. Steam explosions erupted where superheated flame met pressurized water. The second wave lasted 12 minutes, with 3 breaches of their outer defenses but no damage to the fortress itself. By now, 2 of the original 10 teams had been eliminated, their fortresses crumbling as central cores were compromised. "Final wave approaching," Lucifer announced, his expression unchanged despite the intensifying challenge. 6-star hybrids. The final wave erupted into the arena with calculated violence, shattering through the walls at unexpected points. Massive chimeric beasts with multiple elemental affinities charged the remaining fortresses from all directions simultaneously. These hybrid creatures combined multiple threatening aspects: the speed of predatory cats with the durability of armored reptiles, the destructive force of elemental conduits with the intelligence of higher species. "They're changing course," Jin observed as the largest chimera, a 3-headed monstrosity combining lion, eagle, and serpent aspects, headed directly for their central tower. "They're targeting our core, not our defenses." "As expected," Lucifer replied. "Time for convergence." With a precise sequence of hand movements, he activated the fortress's central array, connecting all 6 team members to the power core. Energy pulsed through predefined channels, temporarily boosting their capabilities but requiring perfect synchronization. "This feels substantial," Jin remarked, dark mana expanding exponentially around him. His undead warriors transformed into fully armored death knights with spectral weapons that left trailing shadows where they passed. "Let's make use of it." Jin directed his death knights to intercept the smaller chimeras, their dark weapons effectively disrupting the hybrid beast's multiple energy signatures. Wounded chimeras found their hybrid aspects fighting against each other, elemental affinities destabilizing. Ava, similarly enhanced by the core connection, moved with unprecedented speed. "I'll handle the flankers," she called, targeting the beasts attempting to circle around their main defenses. Her body seemed to blur as she moved faster than ordinary vision could track, appearing at multiple points around the fortress perimeter almost simultaneously. "These things are tough," she grunted after delivering a series of strikes that would have killed any 5-star beast instantly, only to have the 6-star creature stagger but continue its advance. "But not tough enough." She redoubled her assault, targeting the same impact point repeatedly until even the reinforced structure gave way. While his teammates handled the perimeter threats, Lucifer descended from the tower to confront the primary danger, the 3-headed chimera that had nearly reached their walls. Unlike the frantic defense occurring at other fortresses, his movements remained measured, each step calculated to intercept the beast at the optimal position. The chimera sensed his approach and responded with overwhelming force. The lion head roared, releasing a cone of concentrated fire that melted stone where it touched. Simultaneously, the eagle head's eyes glowed with electrical energy before discharging lightning strikes that forked through the air. The serpent head completed the assault by spitting jets of corrosive venom that hissed and bubbled on contact with the ground. Lucifer activated both his gifts simultaneously, his god's eyes perceiving the precise composition and trajectory of each attack, while his yin-yang body manifested counterbalancing elements. Ice formed a path through the flames, earth elements absorbed and grounded the lightning, and water currents diluted and redirected the venom. "You're powerful," Lucifer acknowledged as he engaged the beast directly, but ultimately predictable. The fourth and final movement of the Northern Peak art that Lucifer had managed to achieve manifested through him. Avalanche Tempest. The air around him became a maelstrom of elemental forces, perfectly harmonized according to principles few could comprehend. His sword traced complex patterns that seemed to bend the very fabric of space, each motion precisely calculated to intercept one of the chimera's attacks. The beast staggered, its coordinated attack pattern disrupted by Lucifer's perfect counters. It attempted to adapt, changing tactics to focus all three heads' attacks on a single vector, a concentrated beam of combined elements. "Jean, now!" Lucifer called, deliberately creating an opening in his defense. Jin's Death Knights encircled the chimera, their weapons striking in perfect unison. Each blade targeted a different vulnerability within the beast's body, severing connections and disrupting its energy flow. The chimera's concentrated beam faltered as its internal coordination collapsed. "Ava!" Jean called, maintaining pressure on the beast. "Already here," she replied, launching herself into a controlled descent above the chimera. Her final technique manifested as she rotated midair, generating centrifugal force that concentrated all her accumulated power. Both fists led her downward trajectory, crimson energy swirling around them in tightly compressed spirals. Her impact struck the chimera's central mass, the point where all three aspects connected and where its composite nature was most vulnerable. The force transferred through the beast's body in visible shockwaves, shattering internal structures. Cracks spread across its hide, leaking multicolored energy. "It's weakened, but not defeated," Ava called out, flipping backward to avoid the creature's desperate counterattack. "Still dangerous." Lucifer, recognizing the critical moment, stepped forward. The time for measured defense had passed. Now was the moment for overwhelming force. His blade glowed with the combined light of order and chaos, the white and black aspects of his yin-yang body fully manifested. "Enough," he stated simply, his voice carrying absolute conviction. With a movement too fast for normal eyes to track, Lucifer executed a perfect cutting arc that sliced through the chimera's massive body. The raw power behind the strike was staggering. Not just physical force but concentrated elemental energy that overwhelmed the beast's remaining defenses. The three heads roared, screeched, and hissed in unison as the blade cleaved through them, its passage leaving trails of elemental disruption that prevented regeneration. The chimera's body collapsed, its enormous mass crashing to the ground with an impact that shook the arena floor. "Impressive," Jean noted calmly, banishing his constructs now that the threat was neutralized. "Show off," Ava added with a grin, landing beside the fallen beast. "But effective." As the chimeras remained settled, a signal rang out across the arena, a resonant tone that indicated the final wave had been repelled. Only 4 fortresses remained standing, their teams having successfully defended against all 3 increasingly difficult waves of attackers. The judges' assessment was swift and unanimous. Fortress 3 had demonstrated exceptional performance across all evaluation criteria. Not only had they repelled all waves with minimal damage to their structure, but they had displayed remarkable teamwork, tactical adaptation, and effective use of the core enhancement. The point distribution reflected both individual performance and team contribution. Lucifer Windward placed first overall, his command presence and perfect execution of the Northern Peak art earning him the highest individual score. His raw power and strategic utilization of the team's capabilities had been the cornerstone of their success. Gene Ashbluff secured second place, his dark mana control proving crucial to their defensive strategy. The judges particularly noted his adaptation to each wave's specific threats, modifying his undead forces to counter the unique properties of the attacking beasts. Ava Peng took third place, her systematic elimination of flanking threats recognized as a key factor in their victory. Her ability to precisely target weaknesses and deliver overwhelming force at critical moments had repeatedly turned the tide in their favor. As the competitors gathered for the announcement of results, Lucifer glanced at his teammates. "We worked well together," he said, a rare acknowledgement from the typically reserved prince. The Inter-Academy Festival had begun in earnest, and with it, the true measure of this generation's potential. Chapter 315, Dimensional Labyrinth. The second event of the Inter-Academy Festival was the Dimensional Labyrinth. Unlike the Mana Fortress defense, which tested team coordination against external threats, this challenge plunged 60 individual competitors into an ever-shifting maze where the laws of physics themselves were negotiable. The event was designed to test adaptability, spatial awareness, and problem-solving under pressure, qualities essential for any high-ranking mage operating in unstable environments. The massive arena had been transformed overnight. Gone were the fortress structures, replaced by a sprawling labyrinth constructed of gleaming obsidian walls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Viewing screens positioned around the spectator stands displayed various sections of the maze, allowing the audience to track competitors' progress through the otherwise opaque structure. Professor Valerie addressed the participants gathered at the entrance. "The dimensional labyrinth is not merely a maze," she explained, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "It's a test of your ability to navigate through spatial distortions. The paths will shift, gravity will reorient, and what appears as a straight line may lead you in circles." She gestured to the first corridor, which seemed to stretch into infinite darkness despite the arena's finite dimensions. "Your objective is simple. Reach the center and retrieve a token, then find your way back out. Both speed and the obstacles you overcome will factor into your final score." Among the 60 competitors standing at the threshold, Clana Lopez looked uncharacteristically alert, her usually sleepy expression replaced by focused calculation. The white-rank mage from Mythos Academy was known for her perpetual exhaustion, but today even she recognized the need for full consciousness. Her mind aspect gift, spell synergy, would be crucial in a challenge where adaptability trumped raw power. Nearby stood Aaron Myriot, his imposing figure casting a long shadow. The Myriot family's heir wore the distinctive dark armor of his lineage's tradition, modified to accommodate the sleek aesthetics of his academy uniform. His axe, a masterwork of engineering and magical craftsmanship, rested against his shoulder with deceptive casualness. The Dark Knight's expression revealed nothing, but his eyes, sharp and assessing, continuously scanned his competition. "Competitors, take your positions," Valerie commanded. "You will enter at 10-second intervals. Your time begins the moment you cross the threshold." The first student stepped forward, disappearing into the darkness of the labyrinth's entrance. Then another, and another, each vanishing at precisely timed intervals. When Aaron's turn came, he strode forward with measured confidence, the darkness swallowing him whole without hesitation. Several positions later, Clana approached the entrance. Unlike many who tensed or prepared dramatic entrances, she simply yawned, stretched, and stepped forward as if walking into her bedroom rather than one of the most challenging events of the festival. "What a pain," were her final words before the darkness claimed her. Clana emerged into a corridor that seemed standard enough, smooth obsidian walls stretching forward until they met at a junction 30 meters ahead. The ceiling glowed with embedded light strips, providing adequate illumination without revealing too much detail. It would have been entirely unremarkable if not for the slight distortion in her peripheral vision, like reality itself was slightly out of focus. "Dimensional manipulation," she muttered, immediately activating her primary defensive spells. Rather than rushing forward like many competitors would, She took a moment to analyze the environment. With her mind aspect gift, she could maintain multiple spells simultaneously, layering them for maximum effect. A detection array formed around her, thin lines of blue light creating a sphere that would alert her to nearby threats or dimensional instabilities. The initial junction offered 3 choices: left, right, or continuing straight. Clanna closed her eyes briefly, allowing her detection sphere to pulse outward. The feedback was immediate but confusing. All 3 paths registered as both valid and invalid simultaneously. Non-Euclidean geometry, she sighed. Of course they'd start with the basics. She chose the right path, not because it seemed correct but because it triggered her detection spell in a slightly different way than the others, a subtle variance that suggested something unique. As she turned the corner, the corridor appeared to stretch normally for several meters before abruptly ending in a solid wall. Spatial fold, Clanna observed, approaching the wall cautiously. Her detection sphere indicated the presence of a dimensional anomaly. The wall wasn't truly solid but a visual manifestation of space folding back on itself. With careful manipulation of her own mana, she layered 3 spells simultaneously. A spatial anchor to prevent herself from being disoriented, a reality perception enhancer to see through the illusion, and a mana shell to protect against potential backlash. She stepped forward, and instead of colliding with solid stone, she passed through what felt like a membrane of resistance before emerging in a chamber with 5 identical doors. The gravity shifted subtly, what had been the floor now angling at 15 degrees, requiring continuous adjustment to maintain balance. "This is going to be so troublesome," she muttered, already mapping the room's dimensional inconsistencies in her mind. Meanwhile, Aaron Myriot had encountered his first significant challenge. The Dark Knight found himself in a spherical chamber where gravity pulled toward the center rather than downward, forcing him to stand on a curved surface while objects floated in the void at the room's heart. 3 crystalline keys hovered there, each pulsing with different colored light. Unlike many competitors who might have attempted complex mana manipulations to retrieve the keys, Aaron relied on the straightforward approach that had made the Myriot family legendary on the battlefield. Dark mana surged through his body, reinforcing his physical capabilities beyond normal human limits. With a single powerful leap, he launched himself toward the floating keys, using the momentum to snatch all 3 before gravity reasserted its pull. He landed on the opposite side of the spherical chamber, boots finding purchase on the curved wall with practiced ease. The first movement of his family's Grade 5 art, Eclipse Cleaver, manifested not as a combat technique but as a stabilizing force, dark mana spreading from his feet to anchor him against the disorienting gravity. "Primitive," he assessed aloud, examining the keys in his palm. Each corresponded to one of the 3 exits from the chamber, but only one would lead deeper into the labyrinth rather than into a trap or dead end. Aaron closed his eyes, extending his senses through his dark mana. The Myriot family art was primarily offensive in nature, but generations of Dark Knights had learned to utilize its properties for detection as well. Dark mana responded differently to various spatial distortions, flowing more freely toward genuine paths and resisting falsities. The red key resonated most strongly, vibrating slightly against his palm. Without hesitation, Aaron approached the corresponding door, inserted the key, and stepped through into a corridor where the walls pulsed with crimson light. "Too easy," he remarked, continuing forward with confident strides. Clanna had made significant progress through the labyrinth, her approach methodical and energy efficient. Unlike competitors who exhausted themselves forcing their way through obstacles, she analyzed each challenge before committing to a solution. In a section where gravity reversed every 30 seconds, she simply synchronized her movements to the shift pattern, timing her progress to utilize both floor and ceiling as walking surfaces. When confronted with a corridor that looped endlessly, she identified the mathematical pattern in the recursion and cast a targeted spell that broke the cycle at precisely the right moment. Her current challenge, however, proved more complex. She stood at the edge of what appeared to be a bottomless chasm, spanning at least 50 meters across. Floating platforms drifted in the void, moving in patterns that initially seemed random but revealed subtle organization upon closer inspection. "They're following a sequence," she determined after watching for several minutes. Many competitors would have already attempted the crossing, either succeeding through luck or falling into whatever penalty awaited below. Clanna, however, had learned long ago that observation often saved more energy than action. Once she'd identified the pattern, she layered 3 spells simultaneously through her spell synergy gift. A minor levitation effect to extend her jumps, a temporal perception enhancement to better time her movements, and a mana tether that could pull her to safety if she miscalculated. With these preparations complete, she began the crossing, each leap precisely calibrated to land on platforms at the exact moment they aligned. Halfway across, the pattern suddenly shifted, an expected complication in an event designed to test adaptability. Without breaking stride, Clanna adjusted her approach, recalculating trajectories mid-jump. Her expression remained calm, almost bored, even as she executed a particularly difficult maneuver that required her to rebound between 2 rapidly moving platforms. "All this jumping is exhausting," she complained to no one in particular, even as she completed the crossing with more grace than most professional acrobats could manage. The path beyond the chasm led downward, spiraling into what her detection spells identified as a major convergence point, likely the central chamber where the tokens awaited. Aaron Myriot encountered his own set of challenges as he progressed deeper into the labyrinth. A corridor filled with spectral guardians tested his combat prowess, though the creatures proved little challenge for the heir of the Myriot family. His axe moved with brutal efficiency, dark mana enhancing each strike as he executed the second movement of Eclipse Cleaver, Midnight Reaping. The spectral entities dissolved under his assault, their essence dispersing into the air. Aaron didn't slow his pace, moving through the now empty corridor with the same measured stride he'd maintained throughout the challenge. Chapter 3:16. His next obstacle was more sophisticated. A chamber where multiple versions of himself appeared, each mirroring his movements from slightly different angles. The disorientation would have been complete for most competitors, but Aaron had trained extensively in environments designed to confuse and mislead. The third movement of Eclipse Cleaver, Shadow's Truth, allowed him to extend his perception beyond visual stimuli. Dark mana spread outward from his core, identifying the single path where resistance was lowest, the true way forward among dozens of illusions. With a decisive step, he moved toward an apparently solid wall, passing through it as though it were merely mist. The illusions collapsed behind him, the chamber reverting to its actual configuration as he departed. Aaron's progress continued at a steady, relentless pace. While other competitors might have been faster in certain sections or more creative in their solutions, none matched his consistent forward momentum. He wasted no movement, no energy, no time, each decision made with absolute conviction and executed with precision. As he descended a spiraling staircase that occasionally inverted direction, requiring him to adjust his orientation multiple times, Aaron detected the presence of another competitor ahead. The signature was distinctive multiple mana patterns layered with unusual efficiency. Lopez, he identified, recognizing her unique approach to spellcasting. The Dark Knight allowed himself the faintest smile. Competition at last. The central chamber of the dimensional labyrinth lived up to its importance. Unlike the corridors and intermediate challenges, this vast spherical space seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Sections of the floor, walls, and ceiling phased in and out of reality, while gravity shifted unpredictably across different zones. At the center, suspended in a column of light, floated 60 tokens, small crystalline objects that pulsed with inner radiance. Clanna emerged from one of the dozen entrances to the chamber, taking a moment to assess the situation. Several competitors had already arrived and were attempting to reach the tokens, each utilizing their own approach to navigate the chaotic environment. Fascinating design, she admitted, genuinely impressed by the complexity of the dimensional manipulations at work. Rather than rushing forward, she established a safe position near her entrance, layering observation spells to analyze the pattern of shifts occurring throughout the chamber. From another entrance emerged Aaron Myriot, his dark armor absorbing the shifting lights of the chamber. He immediately assessed the situation, noting the positions of other competitors and the various hazards between himself and the objective. Unlike Clanna's methodical approach, Aaron relied on calculated risk. Dark mana surged through his body as he activated the fourth movement of Eclipse Cleaver, Void Traverse. His form seemed to blur slightly, not quite teleportation but a technique that allowed him to move through spaces other than the most direct path, temporarily stepping outside normal dimensional constraints. With 3 powerful surges, he crossed the chamber, avoiding the worst of the gravitational shifts and phasing obstacles. He reached the central column seconds before anyone else, claiming one of the tokens with a decisive grab. Just as he secured his prize, a massive dimensional shift rippled through the chamber. The gravity points reconfigured, what had been relatively stable zones becoming dangerous, while new paths opened where none had existed before. This was the expected escalation, the labyrinth adapting to the presence of competitors in its heart. Clana observed the shift with clinical interest, noting how the patterns had changed. While other competitors scrambled to adapt, she had already layered her spells in anticipation of such alterations. With precise timing, she launched herself forward when a momentary alignment created an optimal path. Her movement through the chamber appeared almost lazy to observers, floating rather than leaping, drifting rather than running. But each motion was perfectly calculated to conserve energy while ensuring progress. She reached the central column shortly after Aaron had departed, claiming her own token with a casual pluck. Now for the troublesome part, she sighed, knowing that exiting the labyrinth would prove more challenging than reaching its center. The return journey confirmed Clana's assessment. While the path to the center had been difficult but relatively straightforward, the exit routes twisted reality far more aggressively. Corridors reconnected to unexpected chambers, staircases led to the same floor they'd started from, and in some sections the very concept of direction became meaningless. Aaron faced these challenges with the same methodical determination that had characterized his entire approach. When confronted with a corridor that seemed to extend infinitely, he applied dark mana to his token, causing it to resonate with the labyrinth's exit. The resulting harmonic revealed the true path, a nearly invisible doorway embedded in what appeared to be solid wall. His progress, while steady, was not unchallenged. The labyrinth seemed to specifically target his reliance on direct approaches, presenting obstacles that required more subtle solutions than force or conventional navigation techniques. In a particularly difficult section, Aaron found himself in a chamber where every surface was a perfect mirror, reflecting not just his image but his mana signature as well. Hundreds of identical dark knights moved in perfect synchronization with him, each reflection so perfect that distinguishing reality from illusion became nearly impossible. For the first time, Aaron hesitated, his confidence momentarily shaken by the perfect disorientation. Then, with deliberate calm, he planted his axe on the floor before him, channeling dark mana through the weapon and into the chamber itself. "Enough games," he stated, his voice even. The fifth and final movement of Eclipse Cleaver, Absolute Night, manifested not as an attack but as a negation. Darkness spread from his axe, temporarily absorbing all light in the chamber and, consequently, eliminating the reflections. In that moment of perfect blackness, discernible only to him through his affinity with dark mana, Aaron identified the true exit, the single point where his energy connected with something beyond the chamber. With 3 purposeful strides, he reached it, emerging into a straightforward corridor just as light returned to the mirrored room behind him. Clana's return journey presented different challenges, specifically designed to test the limits of her spell's synergy gift. In a section where the laws of magic themselves seemed to fluctuate, spells that should have functioned perfectly began to interact in unpredictable ways. Rather than forcing her approach, Clana adapted. Where her layered detection spells became unreliable, she switched to sequential casting, less efficient but more stable in the fluctuating environment. When even that proved problematic, she fell back on fundamental magical principles, manipulating raw mana directly rather than through formalized spells. "They're really making me work for this?" she muttered, uncharacteristically impressed by the sophistication of the challenge. Her usually sleepy expression had given way to focused concentration, a rare sight for those accustomed to her perpetual state of apparent disinterest. Her current obstacle was particularly devious, a corridor that responded to magical energy by actively redirecting it against the caster. Any spell she initiated was immediately reflected back, potentially trapping her in her own magical effects. Clanna considered the problem from multiple angles before arriving at an elegant solution. Rather than casting spells outward, she inverted her approach, creating a negative space within her own mana field, essentially casting a non-spell that the corridor couldn't reflect because there was nothing to redirect. This technique required extraordinary precision and control, maintaining the perfect absence of energy rather than its presence. For most mages, such an approach would be impossible, but Clanna's gift allowed her to conceptualize and execute the complex manipulation. She progressed through the corridor untouched by her own reflected magic, emerging into what appeared to be the final section before the exit. Ahead lay a straightforward path that nonetheless felt wrong to her trained senses. "Too easy," she murmured, extending her perception. Sure enough, what appeared as a direct route was actually the most elaborate illusion yet. A false exit that would loop competitors back to an earlier section of the labyrinth, wasting precious time. With careful probing, Clanna identified the actual exit, disguised as a dead end to the right of the illusory path. A simple disruption spell revealed the truth, the false wall dissolving to show the real way forward. Aaron Myriad emerged from the labyrinth first, stepping through the exit with the same composed demeanor he'd maintained throughout the challenge. His time was exceptional, nearly 20 minutes faster than the previous record for similar events. The crowd erupted in applause as he presented his token to the judges, confirming his successful completion. "Impressive navigation, Mr. Myriad," Professor Valerie acknowledged. "Your direct approach served you well." Aaron inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement but offered no comment. He moved to the designated waiting area for completed competitors, his focus already turning to analysis of his performance rather than celebration of his likely victory. 7 minutes later, Clanna Lopez emerged, her expression suggesting mild annoyance, rather than the exhaustion most competitors displayed. She handed over her token with a casual gesture, stifling a yawn. "That was more interesting than I expected," she admitted when prompted for comment. "Still troublesome, though." As more competitors completed the challenge, many taking significantly longer or requiring extraction when hopelessly lost, the final rankings became clear. Aaron Myriad secured first place with his exceptional time and the challenges he'd overcome. Clanna Lopez took second, her methodical efficiency proving nearly as effective as Aaron's more direct approach. During the award ceremony, the two white rankers acknowledged each other with professional respect. Aaron's slight nod met with Clanna's half-interested glance, neither particularly celebratory, but both recognizing the skill the other had demonstrated. "Your approach was unexpected," Aaron commented during a brief moment when they stood side by side on the podium. "Yours was predictable," Clanna replied, her tone matter-of-fact rather than insulting. "But effective." The Dark Knight's lips curved in the barest suggestion of a smile. "Next time, I won't underestimate your efficiency. Next time, I won't oversleep before the event," Clanna countered, stifling another yawn. Their exchange went largely unnoticed amid the festival's pageantry, but those with the perception to understand recognized it for what it was. A rare acknowledgement between two exceptional talents who approached their craft from opposite directions yet achieved remarkably similar results. The dimensional labyrinth had revealed not just their individual capabilities, but the validity of different approaches to the same challenges. A lesson that would serve competitors well in the events to come. From the audience, Arthur Nightingale watched with focused interest. Clanna had performed even better than he'd expected, her seemingly lazy approach concealing extraordinary magical precision. He made mental notes about both top performers, cataloging their strengths and potential weaknesses for future reference. The festival continued to unfold according to schedule, each event revealing more about the exceptional generation that had gathered to test their limits against one another. Chapter 317. Saintess's Heart. The first day's chaos settled into something that vaguely resembled peace. If peace came with floating camera drones, silent reputation warfare, and aggressive handshakes from people who wanted to sell you their surname on business cards printed with nano ink that changed color depending on how impressed they were with your response. The events were over and the rankings were in. Lucifer Windward, Jean Ashbluff, Aaron Myriott, Ava Pung, Clana Lopez. And, really, those were the only names that mattered, as only they would make it to the Crown Challenge and matter at the same time. The rest were just so much statistical background noise, the kind of names that would appear in tiny font in historical records that future students might be forced to memorize if they were particularly unlucky in their choice of professors. Lucifer at the top was no surprise. He moved like the world owed him its best performance, and was happy to deliver it on a silver platter with a side of, "Please, sir, would you like some more?" Jean was close behind, having raised an army of corpses and calmly walked them through the field like he was taking them on a pleasant stroll to a graveyard picnic. Aaron, the quiet one from Gravehold, had shown up and sliced everything with his axe in the manner of someone who didn't so much cut things as suggest to the universe that being solid was an optional extra some materials might want to reconsider. Ava's fists had done enough talking that she didn't have to, her knuckles practically delivering full philosophical dissertations with each impact. And Clana, well, Clana was Clana. Probably took a nap halfway through and still made the cut, her unconscious body somehow outperforming half the fully awake competitors. The holographic displays throughout the Academy grounds continuously cycled through highlights from the day's events, snippets of spectacular moments, replaying above the heads of passing students. Lucifer's perfect execution of Winter's Ascent flickered 10 feet tall near the cafeteria entrance, his blade trailing frost particles that dissipated into the actual air beneath the projection. The Academy's quantum display technology had improved since last year. Now the holograms carried trace sensory outputs, so anyone walking under Jin's replay would feel the faint chill of death energy raising goosebumps on their skin. Elemental Conquest was next. Rachel and Arya Gu would be there. So would Lucifer, because of course he would. The festival probably wouldn't allow events to start unless he'd signed up for them, just to maintain tradition. Tactical Siege, though, that would be the real spectacle. Jack, Ren, Ian, Ciola, and Aaron. A cocktail of ego, raw power, and repressed trauma, all shaken together and served in a goblet made of competitive violence. That one would be fun to watch. The sort of fun that involves potential property damage and spectacular displays of magical one-upmanship that would leave the arena looking like it had been redecorated by a committee of exploding paintballs with artistic differences. "Arthur, what are you thinking?" Rachel asked, her shoulder brushing against mine with the careful precision of someone who had calculated the exact pressure and duration that would seem accidental while being anything but. I turned to her. Simple skirt, loose t-shirt, golden hair tied up in a braid. Casual, comfortable, beautiful. She was the only person I knew who could eat a cone of mango ice cream and still somehow look like she'd stepped out of a dream, the flavor indicator on the cone's wrapper pulsing a cheery orange that matched her nail polish exactly. "I was wondering where the other girls are," I said, half to myself, scanning the crowded courtyard. She coughed into her hand. Light, suspiciously so. I stared at her. Her eyes didn't quite meet mine, focusing instead on a point approximately 3 inches to the left of my ear, as if that particular patch of air had suddenly become fascinating. She scratched her cheek, a little too quickly. Her fingernails left temporary white marks that faded with the pink flush rising to replace them. "At this point she's not even pretending," Luna muttered in my head, her mental voice carrying the exasperated tone of someone watching a particularly transparent magic trick. "I swear, if she says they're just busy, she probably vaporized them with a prayer. Left nothing behind but small piles of sanctified dust and those little tags that tell you not to remove them from pillows." I didn't disagree. Rachel's competitive streak was less a streak and more an entire paint factory dedicated to the production of victory in all its chromatic variations. "You've got ice cream on your lips?" I said as I leaned forward and wiped it off with my thumb, the nano-chilled dessert still cold against my skin. Rachel froze. Mid-bite, mid-blink, mid-breath. Completely still. I looked at the smudge of mango on my thumb and, without much thought, licked it off. The flavor receptors in my tongue registered the precise balance of sweetness and acidity, alongside trace elements of the enhancement compounds designed to stimulate pleasurable neural responses. Her face went red. Not blush red, emergency level system failure red. The kind of red that suggested her internal cooling systems had just encountered a fatal error, and were now venting excess heat through her skin in a desperate attempt to prevent complete shutdown. "I thought a princess like you was supposed to be elegant," I said, tilting my head. The Academy's ambient light sensors adjusted slightly to accommodate her sudden change in color temperature. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked like a goldfish trying to load a response from a crashed neural network, her cognitive processes apparently stuck in an infinite boot cycle. "Incredible," Luna said in awe, the mental equivalent of slow clapping echoing through my consciousness. "Truly, an art form, weaponized flirtation with the precision targeting system of a military-grade drone. If they taught this at the Academy, you'd be the professor emeritus." "Hey, Arthur," she finally stammered, fingers twisting into her hair like she was trying to strangle the embarrassment out of it, individual strands catching the afternoon sunlight and refracting it into tiny golden prisms. "When is your birthday? You never told me." The question emerged with all the smooth relevance of a submarine in a desert. I tilted my head. "Don't worry about it." The dismissal was casual, designed to create more questions than it answered. "Wah," she started, but I leaned in again, close enough that I could see every flake of gold in her blue eyes, the heterochromatic patterns that gene therapists would charge small fortunes to replicate in less fortunate irises. "You look really pretty today," I whispered, low and smooth, my voice calibrated to maximum disruptive potential. "Don't you think it's a little dangerous to be out here alone, without the other 3 girls to keep you in check?" The words carried just enough suggestion to send her imagination racing. Her ears turned pink, then red. Then I swear I saw steam, as if her body had decided that conventional blood circulation was insufficient for the current crisis and had improvised an emergency pressure release valve. She looked like she might explode. I didn't think today was the day," Rachel muttered, her voice dropping to a register that suggested confidential information was about to be exchanged. "But if it is, I will do my B-dash. We are not going that far." I interrupted her as I felt Luna's emotions filter through to me, a mixture of horrified amusement and second-hand embarrassment that threatened to overwhelm my own emotional processors. "Arthur, the Saintess," Luna began again as I ignored her with the practiced ease of someone who had developed selective hearing as a survival mechanism. At this point, she should know better than to comment on situations that were already accelerating beyond advisory capacity. "Come to my room," I said, the 4 words causing Rachel's pupils to dilate so rapidly that I briefly worried about retinal damage. The Academy's medical AI probably flagged her vitals for monitoring at this point, her heart rate suggesting either intense physical activity or an imminent cardiac episode. As we walked toward my dorms, Rachel's emotional state cycled through variations like a quantum particle refusing to settle on a fixed position. One moment she was smiling with the radiant certainty of someone who had just won a cosmic lottery. The next she was examining the ground with the intense focus of a person who had suddenly discovered that shoe design was their life's passion. Incredible. A person can change emotions so easily, I thought as we reached my room in the Ophelia dorms. By the time we entered, Rachel began giggling. Not the poised, controlled laugh of a saintess, but the slightly manic giggle of someone whose brain had decided that if it couldn't process current events logically, it might as well enjoy the ride. "She's even giggling like a pervert now," Luna said in my mind, her tone suggesting she was mentally taking notes for future reference or possibly blackmail. "Shut up," I responded as I picked up Rachel, her weight registering as slightly less than expected, possibly due to the excitement causing her to unconsciously channel mana into passive levitation, and put her on my lap, and I kissed her, deeply. Chapter 3:18. I was loved from birth. Everyone loved me. Everyone spoiled me. There was nothing I lacked as both the princess of the northern continent and one who was considered the future saintess with the highest pure light talent in the world. When I took my first steps, the photographers documented it from 17 different angles. My childish drawings were preserved in climate-controlled archives as if they were great works of art. When I sneezed, 3 medical drones would appear with tissue dispensers and diagnostic scanners. But life wasn't perfect. My mother's mental breakdown showed me that, and I vowed to myself, I won't love anyone fully. Because loving means to allow other people to hurt you. And that was something I did not want at all. Other than my father and sister, I can't love anybody. After that day I built walls. Not the visible kind. Those would be unseemly for a princess and future saintess. My walls were made of perfect smiles, of careful kindness administered in precise doses, of academic excellence that kept everyone at a calculable distance. I became the person everyone thought I was without ever letting them see who I might actually be. I was unfailingly kind to everyone I met. It wasn't difficult. Kindness is a simple algorithm once you understand its components. Make eye contact for 2.7 seconds. Remember one personal detail about each person. Ask follow-up questions about their interests. The Palace Etiquette AIs had programmed these patterns into me since infancy, and I executed them with flawless precision. Rachel is so approachable, they would say. Rachel makes everyone feel special. They would marvel. Rachel has time for everyone, they would observe. What they didn't realize was that being kind to everyone equally meant being close to no one in particular. It was a perfect defense system. People felt appreciated without actually getting near me. They felt valued without actually knowing my values. They felt connected without actually forming a connection. At the academy, this system worked flawlessly. The professors thought I was dedicated because I submitted assignments precisely 3 hours before deadline. Not so early as to seem eager, not so late as to seem careless. A girl I talked to thought we were best friends because I remembered her maternal grandmother's name and asked about her collection of Southern Continent's 16th century musical instruments. I kept everyone in their proper orbits, close enough to admire the light, far enough that they couldn't touch its source. Then I met Arthur. And now, somehow, I'm here in his room, making a complete fool of myself. His lips are on mine and my carefully constructed system is failing catastrophically. My hands don't know where to go. They hover awkwardly before settling on his shoulders, then move to his hair, then back to his shoulders. I'm not executing the perfect kissing technique I researched. I'm not maintaining the optimal heart rate for romantic encounters. I'm just feeling things. Messy, unquantifiable things. His hands are warm against my back, steady where I am anything but. I'm suddenly aware of how thin the fabric of my t-shirt is, how every point of contact between us seems to generate impossible heat. I should be cataloging this experience for future reference. I should be analyzing his technique for educational purposes. I should be maintaining at least partial emotional detachment. I am doing none of these things. Instead, I am kissing Arthur Nightingale with a desperate enthusiasm that would shock the entire northern continent if they could see their poised princess now. The walls I've built so carefully are crumbling faster than the palace's defensive systems could track. And worst of all, I don't care. Let them fall. Let him in. This is terrifying. This is wonderful. This is possibly the stupidest thing I've ever done. And I don't want it to stop. I love you, I said as we separated, both of us panting. I loved him, just like those foolish teenage girls I read about and scoffed at. Girls who wore their hearts on their sleeves instead of keeping them safely locked. The ones who made terrible decisions for the sake of feelings rather than following properly calculated risk assessments. I fell in love too. I fell in love deeply. I fell in love with this man I was willing to give myself to. Even if he asked for me to give him half of the northern continent my family ruled, I would give it to him by figuring out some way to do so. He was a man I was willing to go mad for. He was a man I was willing to give up everything for. He was a piece of trash who seduced 3 other girls at the same time and who knows how many more. 'Cause he was that damn irresistible. His intelligence that seemed to predict movements 3 steps ahead, like he'd already read the strategy guide to a game everyone else was playing blind. His strength that wasn't just physical but something that radiated from him like a perfectly calibrated force field. Yet his kindness, surprising and unpredictable, appearing in moments when even the most sophisticated pattern recognition software would have predicted selfishness instead. I couldn't keep myself from looking at him. My eyes apparently having decided that autonomous function was overrated and preferred manual override set to stare at Arthur. I knew I loved him from long ago, possibly from the moment he'd looked at me not as the saintess or the princess, but as Rachel, a distinction so few people ever made that my brain had filed it under statistical anomalies worth further investigation. I knew I wanted him for myself, an embarrassingly primitive instinct. I knew I wanted to go as far as imprisoning him. A fantasy I'd entertained that involved a very comfortable cell with excellent amenities and me. Yet why was this still sending fire through my veins? Why was my brain tracing the delicate touch of his hand so precisely? Why did I wish to treasure this moment we found ourselves in? Foolish. Foolish. My love was foolish and would definitely receive a failing grade in any rational decision-making assessment. Yet I loved him regardless, with the kind of stubborn dedication usually reserved for particularly fanatic religious converts or people who insist their ancient, constantly malfunctioning technology is vintage and therefore superior. Arthur, I whispered in his ear as our fingers interlocked against each other, our hands fitting together with an ergonomic perfection. Do you want to? I asked as my hand went on the hem of my shirt. Arthur placed his other hand on top of mine, his palm warm against my knuckles. No, he responded before kissing me again, the kiss somehow managing to be both gentle and firm. And oddly, his refusal didn't sting. Instead, it felt like protection, not the overprotective shields I'd grown up with, but something chosen rather than imposed. Something that said, I want this too, but not yet, not like this, without needing to articulate the words, which was, perhaps, the most foolish thing of all. That even in denial he made me love him more. Chapter 319, Elemental Conquest. The third event of the Inter-Academy Festival dawned with appropriate elemental drama. A sunrise painted in vibrant oranges and reds that seemed designed specifically for the occasion, as if the sky itself was setting the stage. Elemental Conquest was widely considered one of the festival's most visually spectacular events, combining raw power with precision control in a way that transformed combat into art. The arena had been reconfigured overnight into an expansive battlefield divided into distinct environmental zones. A central volcanic field surrounded by forested areas, water features, mountain terrain, and windswept plains. Elemental nodes pulsed throughout these regions, glowing beacons that represented the primary objective. Capture and hold these power sources to enhance one's own elemental affinity while weakening opponents. Contestants, take your positions, she announced. Elemental Conquest begins in 5 minutes. As they moved toward the arena, Lucifer found himself walking beside Rachel. Rachel's sapphire eyes flicked to him, but she didn't say anything. Contestants, Professor Valerie's voice echoed across the arena. Elemental Conquest begins in 30 seconds. Your objective is to capture and maintain control of the elemental nodes. Points will be awarded for duration of control and strategic utilization of enhanced abilities. Deliberate injury to opponents is grounds for disqualification. This is a conquest event, not combat. The countdown appeared as massive holographic numbers floating above the arena's center. As it reached 0, a resonant tone signaled the start, and 60 contestants surged forward from their starting positions. The first moments were chaos, a rush of bodies and elemental powers as competitors raced for the nearest nodes. A serpentstone water mage slipped on ice created by an ashen-hold opponent, colliding with 2 others and creating a tangled pile of limbs and curses. A wind specialist from Pillin used their affinity to leap high above the melee, only to be caught in a sudden updraft that sent them tumbling off course. Amateur hour, Arya muttered as she sidestepped the confusion, maintaining a direct course toward the central volcanic zone. A bulky earth manipulator attempted to block her path, raising a stone barrier directly in front of her. Without breaking stride, Arya executed a spinning kick that left a trail of flames, the heat so intense that the stone cracked and split apart before she even made contact. Out of my way, mountain boy, she called over her shoulder as she passed through the gap, leaving the earth manipulator staring in disbelief at his shattered defense. Lucifer's approach contrasted sharply with the frantic energy around him. While others rushed and collided, he walked calmly forward, activating his yin-yang body gift. 6 elemental energies manifested around him: fire, ice, water, lightning, wind, and earth, orbiting in perfect harmony as he assessed the developing battlefield. Is he strolling? A spectator asked incredulously. From his elevated position, Lucifer surveyed the battlefield like a general. 3 key nodes formed a strategic triangle in the central region, targets that would give him control over a significant portion of the arena. With a precision that spoke of countless training hours, he plotted his course. An Earth node stood closest. As he descended toward it, 3 competitors converged on the same target, determined to claim it first. Lucifer didn't accelerate or change course. Instead, he simply channeled lightning through his right hand and earth energy through his left. When the first competitor attempted to intercept him, Lucifer touched the ground between them. The resulting controlled shock wave sent all 3 challengers stumbling backward without causing actual harm. "My apologies," he said, his tone more formal than apologetic. "This particular node is necessary for my strategy." "You smug." One of the competitors, a muscular girl with Earth affinity tattoos covering her arms, launched herself at him. Lucifer sidestepped her attack with minimal movement, simultaneously placing his palm on the node. The earth around it responded immediately, forming a protective barrier that completed itself just as the girl's fist would have connected with his shoulder. "Perhaps try the water node in the eastern quadrant," he suggested through the earth barrier. "It would complement your secondary affinity better." Across the arena, Rachel moved with surprising speed toward a water node nestled near the boundary between forest and mountain terrain. 2 competitors were already approaching it from different directions, a water specialist from Serpentstone and a lightning user from Gravehold. "The princess thinks she can claim water? That's my domain," the Serpentstone student called out, his hands already drawing moisture from the air to form ice javelins. Rachel didn't respond verbally. Instead, she channeled pure light through her palm, creating not a weapon but a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded both opponents. While they were disoriented, she reached the node first, placing her hand on its surface to establish connection. In the central volcanic zone, Arya had reached her first fire node. The heat was intense enough that the air shimmered around her, but she showed no discomfort as she connected with the pulsing ruby energy. "Finally," she sighed, the flames responding to her presence by rising higher, taking shapes that mimicked her movements. "Something worth working with." A fellow fire user, a boy with flame-red hair and a nervous expression, approached cautiously. "Arya Gu? I'm Jean Ho from—" "I know who you are," Arya interrupted, not unkindly. "You have potential, but your control needs work. I was hoping we might cooperate? Control adjacent nodes to create a larger fire territory." Arya considered this, watching as across the arena, competitors were already forming similar alliances of convenience. "Cooperation has merit," she acknowledged. "Take the node to the southeast. I'll handle the northwest one. When we've secured both, we'll establish a connection." Jinho's face lit up with relief and excitement. "I won't let you down." "See that you don't," Arya replied, already moving toward her next target. By the 20-minute mark, clear patterns had emerged across the battlefield. Most contestants had claimed 1 or perhaps 2 nodes, establishing small territories they struggled to maintain against incursions. But 3 competitors had created notably larger spheres of influence. Lucifer had secured his triangle of nodes, 1 each of earth, wind, and fire, and was systematically expanding outward, his multi-elemental control allowing him to adapt his approach for each new conquest. When a water specialist attempted to flood his territory, Lucifer redirected the attack into carefully positioned channels that actually strengthened his earth barriers. When an air user tried to disrupt his wind nodes, Lucifer incorporated the foreign currents into his own patterns, effectively turning his opponent's strength against them. Rachel had transformed her initial water node into the center of an expanding network. Golden-infused water flowed outward along channels she created, reaching additional nodes and gradually bringing them under her control. When a forest node connected to her network, the trees began producing blossoms that emitted pure light, creating zones where darkness couldn't penetrate. Indeed, there was something unmistakably cleansing about Rachel's approach. Areas under her control seemed brighter, more vibrant, as if the elements themselves were being restored to some idealized state. Competitors who ventured into her territory often found themselves hesitating, their aggressive intent temporarily forgotten as they experienced an unusual sense of peace. Arya controlled the volcanic zone completely, with assistance from Jinho, who had successfully claimed a secondary fire node as promised. The two Starcrest students had created a blazing territory that none had successfully penetrated, fire nodes pulsing in synchronized rhythms under their command. Inside her fiery domain, Arya had created a spectacular display of elemental artistry. Flames twisted into complex patterns above her head, forming shapes that resembled creatures from ancient mythology. Phoenixes, dragons, and more abstract forms that seemed to dance to some unheard rhythm. "Show off," Jinho commented good-naturedly as he maintained his position at the secondary node. "Presentation matters," Arya replied with a grin. "Besides, it keeps our opponents guessing about what's decorative and what's a trap." The final phase of the event introduced a new challenge, elemental instability. The nodes began pulsing more erratically, requiring constant adjustment from their controllers to maintain harmony. "What's happening?" Jinho called out in alarm as his fire node suddenly flared, nearly overwhelming his control. "Phase 3, Arya replied grimly. "They're testing our adaptability. Stay focused." Across the arena, competitors scrambled to adjust to the fluctuations. Many lost control entirely, their carefully established territories collapsing as nodes rejected their influence. Some more experienced participants managed to maintain basic connection but were forced to abandon expansion efforts to focus on stability. Lucifer adapted seamlessly, his expression unchanged as he calmly adjusted his multi-elemental balance. If anything, he seemed to anticipate the changes, his 6 elements shifting in perfect response to each new pattern. "He knew," muttered a nearby competitor, watching in disbelief as Lucifer not only maintained control but continued to expand his territory. "He must have studied previous year's tournaments. Or he just learns that quickly," replied another, respect mixing with envy in their voice. Rachel's network trembled under the instability but held, her recent breakthrough to first-stage integration allowing her to maintain more complex connections than would have been possible at high silver rank. Her pure light served as a stabilizing influence, calming the erratic pulses within her domain. "Adaptation is key," she murmured to herself, making minute adjustments to the flow patterns. Where before she had emphasized expansion, now she focused on reinforcing existing connections, creating redundant pathways that could compensate for unstable nodes. A small group of competitors who had lost their own territories gathered at the edge of Rachel's domain, watching her work with academic interest. "She's using harmonic wave theory," one observed. "See how she's creating interference patterns to cancel out the instability? That's university-level elemental physics," another replied, impressed despite himself. "No wonder she made it to integration rank." Arya struggled more visibly with the fluctuations. Despite her mastery of fire, the unpredictable surges tested the limits of her white rank capabilities. Twice she had to abandon outer nodes to prevent cascade failures within her network. "Jinho!" she called out, seeing her partner's control slipping. "Focus on pure containment. Direction doesn't matter now. Just keep it from breaking free." The young fire mage nodded, sweat pouring down his face as he concentrated all his effort on maintaining the most basic connection with his node. Even that was proving difficult as the ruby energy pulsed erratically, flaring and dimming in unpredictable patterns. Arya herself was forced to abandon her elaborate fire sculptures, diverting all her attention to stabilizing her primary node. Her territory contracted, but what remained stayed firmly under her control, quality over quantity becoming her necessary strategy. "We can't hold this forever," Jinho warned, his voice strained. "We don't need forever," Arya replied through gritted teeth. "Just longer than most of them." When the final signal sounded, ending the event, the rankings were clear. Lucifer had dominated through superior strategy and multi-elemental versatility, his control extending across multiple environmental zones. Rachel secured second place, her innovative integration of pure light with conventional elements creating a resilient network that weathered the instability phase impressively. Arya claimed third, her absolute mastery within her specialized domain compensating for its more limited extent. Chapter 320, Tactical Siege. The fourth event of the Interacademy Festival transformed the arena into a battlefield of strategy and raw power. Tactical Siege featured teams of 5 students, with one team defending a fortress containing 3 objective points, while the attacking team attempted to capture them within 15 minutes. Jack Blazespout stood at the staging area, white flames dancing between his fingertips as he surveyed the fortress his team would be attacking. The low integration rank mage rolled his shoulders, the motion deliberate and focused. "Ren's inside," he said to his teammates. "His god's eyes will have mapped every approach vector already." Jack's normally casual demeanor had shifted to something sharper, more predatory. "We hit from multiple angles. Overload his perception." When the signal sounded, Jack launched forward with explosive acceleration. White flames, his nirvana flames, erupted around his hands. Not illusory but intensely real, burning with a purifying heat that few could withstand. The northern wall of the fortress loomed before him, reinforced stone designed to repel conventional attacks. Jack didn't slow. His right hand swept forward, white flames condensing into a concentrated stream that struck the wall with surgical precision. Where the flames touched, stone didn't simply burn. It purified, molecular bonds breaking down as impurities were burned away. A 6-foot section of wall began to glow white-hot, weakening structurally. Inside the fortress, Renkagu stood motionless, his god's eyes active as he tracked the approaching attackers through solid walls. He registered Jack's assault on the northern section immediately, calculating angle of attack, probable breach point, and time until penetration. "Northern breach imminent," he communicated to his teammates without turning his head. "Leeway. Reinforcement required." Ren's body blurred as he activated collapsing step, the first movement of his void fist art. Space contracted around him, distance between points temporarily shortening. He crossed 30 meters instantaneously, appearing at the threatened section as the wall began to give way. Jack burst through the weakened wall in a shower of superheated stone fragments, white flames wreathing his body. He registered Ren's presence immediately, adjusting his trajectory mid-lunge to account for the defender's position. "Predictable response time," Jack noted, his flames intensifying. Even with spatial manipulation, Ren didn't waste energy on reply. His violet eyes tracked Jack's movement with perfect precision, calculating vectors and force application. His right hand swept forward, fingers spread as he activated Event Horizon, the second movement of his art. The space around Jack distorted subtly, time flowing fractionally slower within the affected zone. To observers, Jack's movements appeared to drag slightly, his acceleration dampened. To Jack himself, nothing seemed changed, but his body suddenly responded a crucial half-second slower than his mind commanded. Jack recognized the spatial manipulation immediately. Rather than fighting against it, he channeled more power into his nirvana flames, the white fire expanding outward in a pressurized wave. The flames didn't attempt to burn Ren directly, but instead superheated the air around them both, creating a rapidly expanding pressure front. The explosive force disrupted Ren's concentration momentarily, weakening the time dilation effect. Jack seized the opportunity, diving past Ren toward the first objective, a glowing crystal mounted on the far wall. His hand closed around it just as Ren recovered. "First objective secured," Jack announced, the crystal pulsing with recognition of capture. Ren's expression remained unchanged, but his tactical approach shifted instantly. Rather than attempting to reclaim the lost objective, he used Void Collapse, his third movement, to instantly strengthen the structural integrity of passages leading to the remaining objectives. Space itself compressed around key doorways and corridors, making what appeared to be normal-sized openings functionally narrower. Anyone attempting to pass through would find themselves compressed uncomfortably, their movements restricted by spatial distortion. Jack recognized the defensive redeployment. "Kai!" he called to his teammate who had followed through the breach. "Phase approach to second objective. They're conceding the first to fortify the others." Across the fortress, Ciola faced a different challenge. Her team had defensive responsibility against Ian and Aaron's group. She stood on the second level of the fortress, her sword drawn but held in a relaxed position. The heavenly sword soul body gift manifested as a subtle luminous quality that extended beyond her physical form, her blade appearing simultaneously solid and conceptual. When warnings came of the initial breach at the eastern approach, Ciola didn't rush to intercept. Instead, she executed a precise series of cuts through the air, not random movements but deliberate patterns that established conceptual boundaries throughout the surrounding space. Her blade moved with impossible precision, each stroke defining an invisible line that carried the essence of her cutting intent. These weren't mere gestures but the manifestation of Skyward Lotus's first petal, establishing zones where her sword's influence extended beyond its physical reach. Anyone crossing these boundaries without her permission would experience the effect of a perfectly executed cut, not from the physical blade, but from the conceptual essence of sharpness she had embedded in space itself. Ian Vizirian approached the second level with cautious determination. His draconic heritage manifested in subtle scales appearing along his forearms, his senses heightened beyond human norm. He paused at the stairwell, nostrils flaring as he detected something unusual in the air currents. "Sword boundaries ahead," he murmured to Aaron, who advanced beside him. "Not visible, but they're there. She's established cutting zones throughout the approach." Aaron nodded, dark mana gathering around his axe. The Eclipse Cleaver Art's second movement activated as shadows deepened around the weapon, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. "I'll create a shadow corridor," Aaron said quietly. "Your draconic scales should provide enough protection for what gets through." The Dark Knight swept his axe in a precise arc, darkness flowing from the blade like liquid shadow. The darkness didn't attack Ciola's sword boundaries, but instead flowed around them, identifying the precise locations of the invisible cutting lines and creating a narrow pathway of shadow between them. Ian followed close behind Aaron, his body partially transformed as scales covered vital areas. Draconic eyes pierced the darkness, tracking the safe path Aaron was creating. When they reached a junction, Aaron paused, sensing a more complex boundary arrangement ahead. Ciola stood at the end of the corridor, sword held vertically before her. She hadn't moved to intercept them directly, but her presence wasn't passive. The second petal of her art had activated, her blade now tracing circles rather than lines. These created not just boundaries but overlapping fields that could activate in sequence, like cascading tripwires. "Clever approach," Ciola acknowledged, her voice calm despite the imminent confrontation. "Few identify the boundaries so accurately." Ian stepped forward, his draconic transformation intensifying as he activated Dragon's Embrace. Flames erupted around his arms as scales covered his entire upper body, his features sharpening as draconic characteristics became dominant. "Your sword establishes conceptual cutting," Ian replied, heat shimmering around him. "But concepts can be burned away with sufficient heat." He launched forward suddenly, flames trailing from his fists, as he charged directly into Ciola's boundary field. The first invisible line activated as expected, a perfect cutting force slicing across his scaled chest. Blood sprayed from the wound, but the draconic protection prevented the cut from reaching vital organs. The second and third boundaries activated in sequence, each cutting deeper than the last. Ian's momentum slowed but didn't stop, his draconic regeneration already working to close the wounds as he pushed forward. Ciola's expression showed genuine surprise at his persistence. She shifted stance, moving into the third petal of her art, Divine Gale. Her sword movements accelerated beyond normal perception, the blade leaving traces of light as it established not just static boundaries, but actively moving cutting forces that surrounded her position. Ian and Aaron found themselves facing what appeared to be a whirlwind of cutting edges, an approach that couldn't be navigated even with Aaron's shadow corridors. The conceptual cutting had become too dense, too mobile to predict. In response, Ian gathered his remaining draconic power for one final push. Flames concentrated around his body as he executed the most powerful technique of Legend of Prominence, Infernal Ascent. The heat became so intense that the air visibly distorted. His draconic form wreathed in flames hot enough to potentially disrupt even conceptual cutting. Aaron provided support by activating Absolute Night, the fifth movement of Eclipse Cleaver. Darkness enveloped the corridor completely, temporarily obscuring even Siola's perception of her own cutting fields. In that moment of sensory disruption, Ian launched forward, flames burning through several layers of cutting boundaries simultaneously. Seola responded with perfect composure, executing Skyward Fall, the fourth petal of her art. Her blade moved in a downward arc of such perfect alignment that it cut through both Aaron's darkness and Ian's flames, a singular stroke that contained the essence of absolute severance. The collision of techniques created a shockwave that cracked the surrounding walls. Ian's flames were partially disrupted. His advance halted mere meters from the objective. Aaron's darkness dissipated, revealing Seola standing untouched between the attackers and their goal, her sword held in the completion position of her technique. "Impressive approach," she acknowledged, genuine respect in her tone. "But insufficient." Elsewhere in the arena, Jack Blazespout's team continued their assault on Ren's defenses. Having secured the first objective, they now focused on the upper level, where the second crystal waited. Ren had anticipated this, using his spatial manipulation to create choke points that would funnel attackers into predictable paths. Jack analyzed the spatial distortions with experienced eyes. "He's compressed the approach corridors," he noted to his teammates. "Anyone trying to pass through will be physically constrained." Rather than attempting to overcome this obstacle directly, Jack implemented an unexpected strategy. His Nirvana flames consolidated around his hands as he placed them against the ceiling, white fire burning upward with controlled intensity. "Creating our own path," he explained as the flames began to burn through the floor of the level above. The white fire didn't spread uncontrolled, but maintained a perfect circular shape, burning away impurities in the material while leaving a clean passage. Run sensed this approach through his god's eyes, immediately calculating a counter-strategy. He couldn't reach the position in time to prevent the breach, so instead, he activated Void Rupture, the fourth movement of his art. This technique didn't target Jack directly but instead disrupted the spatial continuity above the burning section, creating a zone where conventional movement would become unpredictable. When Jack's flames finally burned through, creating an opening to the upper level, he leapt upward directly into Ren's spatial trap. As he passed through the distorted zone, his sense of direction became compromised. What appeared to be vertical movement translated into horizontal displacement, causing him to emerge 10 meters away from his intended position. "Spatial redirection," Jack muttered, quickly reorienting himself. "Clever application." Ren stood between Jack and the second objective, his stance relaxed but ready. "Unconventional approach," he acknowledged. "But predicted." Jack didn't waste energy on banter. His Nirvana flames intensified, white fire spreading outward in patterns, designed to limit Ren's movement options rather than attack him directly. The flames didn't burn randomly but established strategic positions, creating areas that even Ren would find difficult to traverse without consequence. Ren recognized the containment strategy immediately. Rather than attempting to counter it directly, he activated Collapsing Step again, but with a variation. Instead of using it to relocate himself, he applied the spatial compression to the objective crystal itself, momentarily reducing the distance between it and his position while simultaneously extending the distance between the crystal and Jack. This spatial manipulation created a momentary advantage that Ren exploited with perfect timing, placing himself directly between Jack and the crystal just as the distance returned to normal. The maneuver demonstrated mastery of his triple affinity, using space, time, and gravity in perfect harmony. Jack responded with increasing intensity, his Nirvana flames now